Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a big show. We are going to be focusing a lot on the NFL. We talked a lot about college sports yesterday. Today, we're going to do a recap of the of the news of the day. The big news, obviously, Aaron Donald, future Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest defensive players of all time, has retired. We'll talk a little bit about him, his career, the impact that his retirement is going to have on the league and on the Rams. We're also going to talk about some of the trades that have happened in the last 24 hours. The Vikings have traded into the first round. They gave up 2 first-round picks to get the 23rd pick from the Texans. We're also going to talk about the Kenny Pickett trade, what that means for Russell Wilson and the Steelers, and what that means for Kenny Pickett, as well as the big wide receiver news and the Chicago Bears with Keenan Allen being sent there for a fourth, as well as Marquise Brown being signed. We'll get into all that and more later on this show. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. Excuse me. Leave a tip or donation. You can leave a message with that tip. It should pop up on the screen. We'll take a look at what you had to say for me, you, everyone watching across the internet to see as well. We appreciate anything that you do give. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, let's just get right into it. We're going to start off by talking about Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald is one of the best defensive players of all time. He's the greatest defensive tackle ever. It's one of those, he has a legendary career, right? He's one of 2 players in NFL history to go at least 10 seasons and make the Pro Bowl in every single one. He has 8 All-Pro teams, 3 Defensive Player of the Years, and he had 3 in a row as well. Only Lawrence Taylor has done that. You can make the argument he's the greatest defensive player of all time. What he has done is transform the entire defensive tackle position. When he was coming in, he was a first-round pick, but he fell a little bit because people thought he was too small. And now you're seeing defensive tackles around his size, a little smaller than your prototypical defensive tackles, come in and wreak havoc all over the league. Aaron Donald was the predecessor of that. He brought in so much change. He was the guy you had to game plan for as an opposing team. With him out of the defense on the Rams, I'm concerned about the defense as a whole. Aaron Donald was so good, he was covering up a lot of holes on that Rams defense. Not that Rams defense was elite last year, but in coverage, they weren't the best. Their linebacker core leaves a little bit to be desired, and the pass rush outside of him was practically non-existent. The Rams need to fill that spot, and they need it desperately. Excuse me. Now, you're obviously not going to be able to replace one of the greatest defensive players of all time right away. You're not going to be able to snap your fingers and get that done. It's just not possible. It's one of the hardest things to do. It happens. We talked a lot about this yesterday. People go, people come back. You have the greatest player one day, the next day they're gone. And this retirement really kind of came out of nowhere. I know we were sitting in our production meeting here for GSMC when the news broke. And it did come out of nowhere, because when Aaron Donald re-signed his contract, there were rumors of him retiring, and that was real, but there hadn't really been a lot of talk of him retiring this offseason. He still got, there wasn't really any kind of concern. I don't know about you, it kind of came out of nowhere for me. I know if you look back at the past, back to the past 3 years or so, whenever they won their Super Bowl. Right after that, he said he was going to retire. He didn't end up retiring. He ended up signing that new contract. But there weren't any signs this year. It just happened out of the blue, out of nowhere. And now the Rams are left scrambling. A lot of those top guys are off the board. If they had known he was retiring, I'm sure they would have thrown their hat in the ring for a guy like Christian Wilkins, who the Raiders paid $110 million. They might have thrown their hat in the ring at some of these other defensive tackles. I know Chris Jones was really never going to leave the Chiefs, but maybe they throw a boatload of money at him and he is tempted to go to the big market in LA. There were a lot of defensive tackles available, a lot of elite defensive tackles available to replace him. This move kind of comes out of nowhere. I haven't seen a lot of reports from the Rams themselves saying that they knew this was going to happen. I think this took them by surprise, and I'm interested to see how exactly they're going to plug this hole. Because without him, that defense is practically non existent. You also lose your defensive coordinator. He becomes the head coach of the Falcons in Raheem Morris. So it's not really a great situation for the Rams. The Rams are a team who, after going all in for the Super Bowl, kind of fell off a cliff. They really came back last year, made a run at the playoffs, and they've done a really good job, you know, after going all in, being successful really quickly. But losing a guy like Aaron Donald, even on the field, off the field, losing a guy like Aaron Donald is something that you can't really replace. What he brings to that organization, leadership wise, and the skill that he has on the field. Obviously, as one of the best defensive players of all time, you can't overlook him. He constantly gets double teams, triple teams, opens up one-on-ones for the rest of the for the rest of the defensive line. He's just so gravitational. His He was at the top of his game too. And that's why this surprised me the most. He was first team all pro this season. This wasn't, oh, I'm declining, I'm done. This was he had just made first team all pro for the eighth time. The eighth time. That's crazy. Um, and then he just hung it up. He's a very special talent, a guy that we're not going to be able to see in the league for a very long time again. He is a first ballot Hall of Famer. No doubt in my mind, he'll be in Canton in 5 years. Uh, so, congrats to him on retirement. I hope he enjoys it. It's a shame that he's leaving the game. He is a legend of the game. He'll be remembered forever. One of the greatest defensive players of all time, the greatest defensive tackle of all time. It's very impressive what he's done. The Rams also, breaking news just now, actually. The Rams just signed Jimmy Garoppolo. Uh, to be a backup, it's not a move that really moves the needle. They need a backup after they lost Brett Rippon, who was their backup before. Uh, Jimmy G's suspended for the first two games. They still have Matthew Stafford. So, excuse me, this won't be a huge deal. But having a guy like Jimmy G there to just shore up, he's a guy that will make all the throws, especially in a McVay offense. He'll be really solid. Uh, Good backup quarterback. Although now Justin Fields, again, we're Justin Fields is most likely going to be a backup quarterback. Takes another team off the list. A couple teams were ticked off the list today. One did open, but a couple were taken off. The Eagles and now the Rams. Giants are off the list. There's a whole bunch of teams that are off the Justin Fields list, uh, and we'll talk a little bit about that coming up later on in the show. Excuse me. We'll talk a little bit about that coming up later in the show. But yeah, Aaron Donald's legendary career. He is going down in history as one of the greatest to ever do it. So I hope he has a great retirement. Congratulations on reaching that. You deserve all your rest. See you in 5 years when you are a Hall of Famer in that gold jacket. But anyway, in just a little bit, we're going to continue our NFL coverage. We're going to talk about some wide receiver moves. There were a lot of wide receiver moves in the NFL yesterday, a lot of big ones, a couple small ones. We'll talk about all that, break it all down, see what moves were good, what moves were bad. We'll continue after that talking about the Bears. I've really liked the Bears offseason. We'll talk a little bit about exactly what the Bears did this offseason, break down what they've done. They brought Keenan Allen in. They've got two wide receivers now, and they're most likely going to draft Caleb Williams. So very we're gonna break all that down, and then we'll talk about there were some quarterback moves. We kind of talked a little bit about that right here, but we'll talk about that coming up in the upcoming segments. Thank you everybody so much for sticking with me through this first segment on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. We'll be right back. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with me through that break. If you were just tuning in, we just broke down the big news of the day, that being Aaron Donald retiring from the NFL, the future Hall of Famer, one of the greatest defensive players of all time, the greatest defensive tackle of all time, calls it quits on his career. We talked a little bit about that. In this segment, we're going to talk about the wide receiver moves in the NFL. There were a whole bunch of wide receiver moves that went down recently. It's the wide receiver's turn to be the spotlight of free agency of the offseason. We're going to talk about all that in just a second. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation. We appreciate anything that you do give. If you do leave a tip or donation, there will be a link. Or there'll be you leave a comment, it'll pop up at the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little discussion about what you had to say. It'll be there for me, you, everyone across the internet to see. We appreciate anything you do give. Again, that link to donate is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we are going to move into wide receiver moves in the NFL today. The wide receivers, it's their turn in the spotlight. We had a lot of quarterback stuff to begin with. Running backs kind of took center stage early this week, and now wide receivers are moving. We had 3 or 4 major wide receiver moves in just the last couple days. Obviously, the big one being Keenan Allen traded to the Bears. And I love what the Bears have done in the offseason. That's actually going to be our next segment. We're going to talk all about the Bears offseason. I'm a huge fan of that, so we'll break more of that down in that third segment. So forgive me for skipping over that Keenan Allen trade for now. But the rest of the NFL, the rest of the wide receiver moves, the Chiefs finally brought a receiver in. And they could have gone out. They could have gotten a lot of big names. They went with Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown, to be their wide receiver. And to be honest with you, I hate it. I really do. I really hate that move. It's not like I understand you look at what Patrick Mahomes did last year. He didn't need a receiver, but Marquise Brown, well, he's an upgrade at that position for sure. No doubt he's an upgrade there. He is not really going to be a difference maker, I think. We saw him be a wide receiver one in a couple different offenses with Lamar Jackson, with Kyler Murray, and he just wasn't elevating either of their games. What Marquise Brown does very well, he's very fast. He's a good route runner. Um, he reminds me of Kadarius Toney when Kadarius Toney could catch the ball. Uh, so it's a good pickup. I think it's a savvy move by the Chiefs. Go get a guy you can get for relatively cheap. You don't have to go out and you don't have to sign a guy like Mike Williams or Michael Gallup, who are both available now after they were both released in the last couple days uh, or today. Mike Williams is an interesting case because I think Mike Williams would fit really well in Dallas. Obviously, the Chiefs are always in the market for a receiver. Uh, but we're taking a look here at Michael Gallup, who is a very similar wide receiver to Mike Williams. Obviously, they're both outside guys, contested ball catchers. It's a very interesting situation to monitor there, where these guys go. There's still openings all over the league for wide receivers. The question is, are they going to take the most money, or are they going to go where they're contending? Because the Giants obviously could use a receiver. They don't have one. Period. Point blank. The Commanders could probably use a receiver to be opposite uh, a slot guy, a slot receiver. They've got Terry McLaurin and they've got Jahan Dotson on the outside. Uh, but the Cowboys and the Chiefs obviously both need receivers. Those guys could be contending teams. Uh, and the Patriots could use a receiver too. I wouldn't be surprised to see a Mike Williams Patriots type deal. Uh, and the Chargers, they need receivers. I know they just cut Mike Williams and they needed to get below the cap, and that's the reason they got rid of excuse me. That's the reason they got rid of Keenan Allen, because they needed to get below the cap. But taking a look at their roster now, they have Josh Palmer at wide receiver. They have Quentin Johnson, excuse me, a wide receiver. That's not a real inspiring receiver core. Now they are picking at 5. They were rumored to go get Joe Alt, but now that they've blown up their receiver core, I would be shocked if they didn't draft either Rome Odunze or Malik Nabers, whichever one they like more. Rome Odunze is more of that contested jump ball, big body, classic receiver on the outside guy, while Malik Nabers is your jittery, quick slot, can be on the outside as well. Uh, Great routes, faster, explosive guy. So they're two different receiver archetypes, and it's really up to John Harbaugh and the Chargers GM to decide how they want to do this. There's a bunch of different ways that they could do it. Uh, I think that they'll grab probably Malik Nabers. I think he's 1A or 2A for me with Rome Odunze, who's 2B. Uh, but the Chargers wide receiver room is a mess, and they need to get that fixed. Uh, on top of that, again, the big move of the day is Keenan Allen being traded to the Bears, and it puts the Bears in a very interesting situation as far as draft picks as far as draft picks go. Because with this, it kind of changes the math of them getting another receiver at 9, but they don't really need one because you now have Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. Now it'd be great if you could get one of those top 3 guys at 9, as well as Caleb Williams at 1, but in order to do that, the math just is not quite mathing there. Uh, the the way that the wide receiver